It's a big win for flourless chocolate cake eaters. Hey friends, I hope your week is off to a great start. Today we're going to be trying out another recipe from Claire Saffitz's cookbook Dessert Person. This is her flourless chocolate wave cake. So traditionally when you have a flourless chocolate cake, it's super dense, it's really rich and fudgy, and the pieces are super tiny because they're so intense that they really overwhelm you quite quickly. So Claire said she developed this recipe to counteract all of those negative attributes around the traditional flourless chocolate cake. So as someone who loves chocolate cake and flourless chocolate cakes, I'm really curious to see how this one stacks up. So without any further ado, let's get right into it. Here in a large heat-proof bowl, I've got my Semisweet Chocolate. As always, I'm using this Guittard brand. It's not sponsored. This is just hands down my favorite chocolate, so highly recommend. To that, we're going to add some neutral oil. I'm using vegetable, as well as water. And last, we're popping in a few tablespoons of dark rum. You could also use Amaretto. So now we're going to pop this on a double boiler and just stir it until it's melted. All right, and that took less than 5 minutes, and our chocolate and everything is all melted together. So it's looking nice and smooth here. So we're just gonna set this aside for a few minutes to cool down slightly. All right, so this recipe uses almond flour as the dry ingredient. However, almond flour is about $16 a pound and we need only a half cup. So me being the thrifty person that I am, realized I've got some almond meal that I used for a previous recipe, and almond meal and almond flour function similarly. The difference here is that almond meal is a little bit coarser. So what we need to do is mill it down to be a finer powder. So I've got my almond meal here measured out. We're going to pop this into our blender, and we're just going to process this until it's broken down. All right, and so this looks like it's been broken down some. You can see it's a little bit lumpy. Almond meal is basically ground up almonds, so there's fat in here. So obviously when we're blending it, that's also the process you use to make almond butter. So I think possibly some of the fats just got a little bit warm and it made it stick together. So we can just pass this through a sieve before we need to use it. So the melted chocolate's been cooling for about 5 minutes. It's still slightly warm, but by no means is this hot. We just really wanted it to cool down enough so that we don't cook the egg yolks when we add them in. Speaking of egg yolks, we'll add in our 6 egg yolks, and then we'll thoroughly whisk this to get those incorporated. And Claire notes that it is okay if this looks a little bit curdled and separated. It should come back together once we add that almond meal. All right, so those egg yolks look fully incorporated to me. I see no yellow streaks whatsoever. Texture here is looking pretty good. It looks like a really, really thick chocolate pudding almost. Now we'll add in our makeshift almond flour. And you can see mine's a bit lumpy, so just using my fingers, I'm going to press that through just to break those lumps up. And with that sifted in, we can whisk to incorporate. All right, and that looks nice and smooth and glossy. So we can set this aside until we're ready for it. This recipe doesn't use any leavening agents in the batter, so all of the lift that we're getting is going to come from whipped egg whites. So let's do that right now. I'm going to be using my stand mixer. However, you could do this equally well with a hand mixer. The one word of caution is we need a fully fat-free environment for the whisking of the egg whites. Otherwise, you're not going to get the appropriate amount of lift. So I've cleaned my bowl and my whisk with a little bit of white vinegar just to remove any trace residue of oil from previous recipes. So let's go ahead and add the egg whites in here, along with a little bit of kosher salt. All right, so we're going to whisk this on low speed just long enough to get the egg whites broken apart. Then we're going to crank it up to medium-high and whisk until we hit soft peaks. All right, so this has been about 1 minute on low speed. The whites look fully broken apart and it seems like we've got a homogeneous mixture there. So now I'm going to crank it up to medium-high and we will whisk until we hit soft peaks. So our whisk is starting to leave track marks in the egg white mixture here. All right, so this has been just about 4 minutes of whisking over medium-high. I'm seeing a little bit of track mark left by the whisk. It's holding some structure, but generally it doesn't want to stand up fully on its own. So we'll call that a soft peak. So now back over medium-high speed, we're going to slowly stream in our half cup of sugar. You don't want to pour it too fast and knock out all of the air that you've worked in there. And you should be pouring the sugar slowly enough that you can actually see individual granules of sugar. And with all the sugar in, we're going to crank this up to high and whisk until we have stiff peaks. We whisked this over high speed for a minute. So you can see we've got a ton of volume here. And let's see if we're there. I'd call that a stiff peak. So it's standing up pretty well. Claire cautions you don't want to overbeat this and dry it out. So this is still nice and glossy and smooth. And we'll pop this back over high just for a moment to whisk in some vanilla extract. That was just about 30 seconds to mix in the vanilla. Perfect. All right, so we are just about there. We've got our super rich chocolatey mixture. We've got our super light and fluffy meringue mixture, and now we just need to combine the two. So to do that, we're going to take about a quarter of this egg mixture, and we're going to whisk it into the chocolate. So we've obviously got two things that are very different consistencies, so we need to kind of find an equilibrium between the two. Whenever you're doing something like this, your first addition of the light mixture is kind of a sacrifice because you're not going to be able to maintain the aeration that you've got in there. So we're just going to beat it vigorously with a whisk to get it incorporated until there are no streaks remaining. And so you can see just that addition right there really loosened this texture up considerably. And so yeah, we sacrificed a quarter of our meringue. However, it set us up for success to maintain the volume in the remaining 3/4. So now in 2 additions, we're going to add in the remaining meringue mixture. So we'll just divide that in half. And so now at this point, we do want to be very gentle with the meringue to maintain that volume. So we're going to be using a folding method of gently going over and under. So I'm using large sweeping motions and really trying to get around the bottom and around the sides. I think that's pretty good. Let's add the remaining bit. Kind of wishing I had used an even bigger bowl for this, but let's get that incorporated. And Claire notes that it's better to undermix than it is to overmix. So I've got a few streaks in here. All right, and I think this looks pretty good. Overall, it still has a lot of volume. It's loosened up a lot. So I think we're in good shape. All right, so now we are ready to bake. So I've got my 9-inch springform pan here. I brushed the inside with some vegetable oil, poured in some granulated sugar and shuffled it around just to get an even coating inside. And now we will pour this entire batter in. Wow, it is to the top. And the final finishing touch here is just sprinkling with more granulated sugar. I'm sprinkling from a high distance above the cake, trying to get it evenly spread out so I don't have globs of granulated sugar, but I think there's just so much sugar, there's really no getting around having a visible white sugar presence on the surface of this cake. And with that, we're ready to bake. So I'm gonna pop this into our preheated 350-degree oven for 30 to 35 minutes until a toothpick inserted in the center comes out with a few moist crumbs. Our cake baked for a total of 33 minutes. I let it cool in the pan on a wire rack for a little over a half hour, and this is the end result. So the surface has a nice presence of that granulated sugar, the crust on the outside is wavy, the top is wavy. The cake itself looks nice and kind of light but really rich at the same time. Seeing a little bit of underbakedness possibly in the center, so we'll evaluate that when we get to tasting. And with that, super eager to dig in, so let's give it a taste. Maybe I'll go straight to the center since it looked a little bit underdone. Wow, it's very rich. I was expecting this to be kind of more of a mild chocolate, but that hits you. It is as rich and chocolatey as a typical flourless chocolate cake, but the texture is super light. That inside kind of tip bit, a little bit underdone, firm, but kind of had a little bit of like a ganache type of vibe to it. Let's try the crust and see what's going on back there. It's nicely baked. This top bit, where we sprinkled all that sugar down, is super crispy. It's almost like brownie skin, but like times 10. It's much thicker than brownie skin, but it's got that same kind of crispy, flaky vibe. Let's see if I can get a piece up to show you. So it's almost translucent, and it's absolutely delightful. I really enjoy that. This is nice. The rum comes through. It's very subtle. First bite, I didn't taste it. 3 bites in now, I'm definitely getting the rum flavor, so I enjoy that. The overall eating experience and kind of texture sensation that I'm getting from this really reminds me a lot of the chocolate soufflés that I made, which was also a Claire recipe, but when she was at Bon Appetit. I'm a fan of this chocolate wave cake. It's got the richness and the fudginess of a typical flourless chocolate cake, but with the egg whites in there, we've got all of this lightness, so it's not eating heavy and dense, which makes it much more enjoyable. It doesn't sit heavy in your stomach either, so I think this is a situation where I can finish the slice and not feel regret when I'm done. So I'll call that a win. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next week.